All right. So in class today, in our cybersecurity bootcamp, we covered using Metasploit to try to move laterally through a Windows target over to another Windows target through SMB or server message block. There's a bit of difficulty for me and for other students, so I wanted to try and run through it here and hopefully do it cleanly so that you can figure out the flow of how everything should look. While it loads, we will look through some of the terms and some of the objectives here. We're looking at privilege escalation. Once we find a vulnerability in a system like an open port or an unlocked computer, we might use Metasploit to escalate our privileges and get root access to the system. As the root administrator user, you can extract more information, you can perform more commands, you can do more damage. So as a pen tester, we want to escalate our privileges as much as possible in order to discover the depth of the vulnerabilities. Different usernames you might see in Linux and Mac would be root. Windows might be administrator, system, NT authority, and then groups in those operating systems with administrative privileges might be root on Linux Mac or wheel on Linux Mac, and administrators on Windows. So let's see. Techniques for privilege escalation are one of the following: gain access to a user account with admin privilege, exploit a vulnerable program that can give us admin privilege, exploit an OS vulnerability that could lead to admin. So basically through a user account, through a program, or through the OS. And there's going to be a meter attack framework breakdown on privilege escalation in that link from meter attack. It looks like TA0004 for the code, the ID on there. We'll play with this exploit first. It's not an exploit, more so a recon tool within Metasploit, where we're going to explore potential exploits within the Windows system. And then we'll move through. We're going to skip this first portion because really it's just grabbing a Python script and running it. And we should be able to complete that. If you have any questions about it, just let me know. But the command is going to be Python 3. And then plugging in this guy. Looks like this would be running it like as a bash script potentially. Let's see. In what directory is the file located? What's unique about the permissions? The program here contains. So this is looking like this is the Python file, and this is probably a .sh file. So you can run it through bash like that. Just a guess, because I went through it pretty quickly the other day. We've got our Kali machine finally started up here. We've got our Windows target opened. So Windows 1, I believe we're going to use to try and get into initially and then move laterally from here to Windows 2 system. That's my understanding of it. I'll adjust that if needed. For now, we need to escalate our privilege in the initial target. So we're going to cheat a little bit and grab the IP address. We'll wait patiently for command prompt to load here. In the meantime, we'll run through some of the commands. We're going to use who am I to see the domain, the user. Though the domain Seems to look different in different places, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. We'll run who am I. This first portion is supposed to be the domain, and then fstack is the user. If we go into network and sharing and wait patiently, click on Ethernet 2, click on details. I've also read that this is the domain, which is a domain for an AWS EC2 instance, I believe. If we look in another section, it might say work group is the domain. So it's a little unclear on that, but we'll keep that in mind as we go forward. But for now, we need to check IP config to grab the IP address 315.189. See if we have traffic going through. It looks good there. So we're seeing traffic. I was going to run a script to disable the firewall stuff right here using netsh, but I guess we don't need to. So that's fine. I'm cool with that. We'll open up a new tab so we have the IP saved, and we'll run MFS console. And wait for that to load up. All right. It wants us to open a notepad on the Windows system and keep it open. We'll be using the notepad. So let's go ahead and open that. We can use terminal command prompt here. Please, please, please work with me. One day, Father. Once that stops being broke, please, please. Let's refresh it. How about that? There we go. All right. Okay. IP config to grab the IP address. Who am I? For the username, potentially a domain, depending on the hierarchy of the network, I think. Notepad.exe to open Notepad. Now we're running the Notepad process, and the important thing we're going to want to see is the process ID of Notepad. I just typed in task list and pressed enter. That runs all of the, I believe, active tasks, programs. Notepad is 3288 for me. So we'll keep that in mind and move back to our lovely Metasploit console. Clear it out for some room to work. Move to the Kali system, open Metasploit, establish a interpreter session using the administrator username and password academy. Set the SMB domain to the correct value and set the payload to reverse TCP. Now, I want to see where it's saying, okay, after exploiting the vulnerable service on the Windows server and getting reverse shell, we run a netstat command and notice an outbound connection on port 445. Let's see if we see that. We're running netstat. I see 8443, which is generally the secondary to 443, which is HTTPS. I see some HTTPS ports labeled here, but I don't see SMB or 445. Out of curiosity, I'm going to check the other Windows machine. So I'll put 1 first on the tabs. This seems promising. However, after running Who Am I, you realize you're not the admin. Yeah, that's fair. Black screen of death. There we go. moving faster than it wants. You are not the admin user you are used to being. Instead, you're a regular unprivileged user. This means you cannot run tools like Mimikatz to steal credentials. Instead, you can laterally move to other Windows systems on the network. You've been tasked with figuring out a way to gain admin privileges on the Windows system. So let's go ahead and say, who am I? We are fstack. Again, let's run netstat. Do you see any SMB? I do not see any SMB. I see HTTPS for the foreign address. I see 8443 HTTPS for the local. You know, we'll just roll with it. I'm sure the instructions are right? Let's at least have our IP address for the second machine available. We'll just type Windows 2 here for reference for now. IP address using ipconfig right there. And let's go ahead and do stuff. Let's do some stuff. We did steal the hash previously with a reverse shell. We hash dumped it and grabbed the hashed passwords, cracked those with John the Ripper for the administrator. So technically we have the password for admin. So let's go ahead and start working on what they are saying here. First thing we'll do is search for that local exploit suggester and try that out. Use 0, see what options are required. We could also do info, I believe. This module suggests local interpreter exploits that can be used. Suggestions based on the architecture and platform that the user has a shell opened with, as well as the available exploits in Meterpreter. It's important to note that not all local exploits will be fired. Exploits are chosen based on these conditions: session type, platform, architecture, required default options. So let's start setting stuff. What are the options available? Let's set the payload to be a reverse TCP, just to start off with what we know. x64 interpreter reverse TCP. We're going to set the target to 315189. Set our hosts 172, I forgot the number, 315189. Set our port to 4444. Set L host, that's us, and you can use the interface or IP address. Interface is easier for me to remember on this. You can pull that up with IP space ADDR or sudo ifconfig. And now we'll go ahead and show options. Let's see. Session, show options. I wonder if we need to have it mentioned here a shell opened already. So I wonder if nothing's going to happen until we open a shell. We need a session, so we do need a shell. So we got ahead of ourselves and we accidentally quit out of the whole thing there and just messed up all the things. Don't you do this to me. It was messing up the typing there for a moment. I find that maximizing the screen helps with Alright, Windows Privilege Escalation. Log into the Windows VM. Use the whoami and ipconfig. Wants to use whoami to get the domain, but I'm not so convinced that's correct. When a notepad document, we need to open the notepad document. We still have that open. Process ID, slow myself down. Japers. Process ID for notepad 3288, keeping that in mind. Opening Metasploit, establishing an interpreter session on the Windows system using the info that we cracked, shared here. Be sure to set the SMB domain. So it doesn't actually explicitly say use psexec, but it wants us to use SMB. And that's server message block, and that's what psexec uses, so we'll probably do that. Switch. We're going to go with the exploit there, not the auxiliaries. Auxiliaries for recon post names are for after access, for getting more dirt. So we're going to use one. And the payload set to Windows Interpreter Reverse TCP, but I'd like to be explicit in that we're using the x64 architecture. And we need to remember to set the payload, or else the system won't know what we're doing with it. We need to see the other options real quick and spell things correctly. Our port 445, we like that. Set our hosts. It is required. 315.189. 172.315.189. Set. We already have the port set. We've got our local host and port set. Set SMB user administrator. Administrator. Set SMB pass to the correct password. It says we need to set the domain. I'm going to try running it as is and see what happens. Selecting PowerShell target, executing the payload. We'll just wait in suspense. Service timed out. Session opened. Are we in? That looks like we're in. Let's look at help for commands from interpreter. There's a lot. There's a lot. All right, cat checksum, dir, local working directory, read contents of local file to screen. Migrate the server to another process. So I think that's where we're going to be with the notepad session that we had set up. So we didn't set the SMB domain, but it did establish a connection. I think 3288 was our process ID for notepad, right? Let's try that. Let's double check, 3288, I remembered. Migrate 3288. And I was trying to figure out exactly what this does. So I looked it up on Gemini Cricket. And where did I put it? Migration. Process migration is separate from establishing the initial shell. The migration relocates the running interpreter payload within the target system. I think the idea is that it makes it more stable, being in something like Notepad. Some processes less likely to be monitored, so it's more stealthy. and potential privilege escalation by using Notepad. So now we're going to go ahead, we're in the shell now as indicated by its name interpreter, but we want to go and start using the post exploit suggester. So we're going to do the background command, which puts this interpreter session in the background. We can do show sessions to see it. And right now we're going to hit back again to search for post multi recon local exploit. We'll just go there. It's the only one, so we'll use 0. And let's see. Info. So we need to put set session. So we'll do show sessions, set session 1. Show description is required, either true or false, most likely. Let's go ahead and just run it as is and look for exploits. Execute the module, view the output. Sometimes the module may freeze, so Control-C it to cancel out of the loop. Search for local ask module and use it. This module prompts the user to run an executable to establish an elevated interpreter session. So it sounds like it's going to ask the Windows user to mindlessly press yes on something. So we'll try that out. Sounds kind of fun. Once this is done, we'll separate the windows a bit more so we can see both. Bunch of exploits for x64 architecture in Windows 2205. But we're going to run an elevated interpreter session after we ask for it. Politely set the session to the session we noted, set the payload we already did, so that should be good. Execute the module and move back to the Windows VM. A pop-up window will appear, prompting you to run an executable. Press yes to run it. And then we will have established an elevated privilege interpreter. Type in get system to escalate to the system user. We now have escalated to system user. So it looks like there's a multi-step. You're not automatically elevated once you get them to hit yes on the executable, but once you hit get system. So this appears to be vulnerable. Post interrupted by the console user. That is not true. I did not. Oh well. So let's try. Can we do search in here, or do we have to go back? Search local ask. I guess it works. So exploit Windows, search local ask, use 0. We've got to set the payload again, it looks like. Windows, and we're setting it for local ask this time, different exploit, different payload. x64 interpreter reverse TCP, show options, session is 1. Let's just show sessions again to verify. Set session 1. The interpreter session itself should already have the remote host and remote port set. Let's go ahead and just run this, and like I said, I'll separate this a bit more so that we can see it happening live. Run. Sending stage. Session 2 opened. Did we see any request, or did it just automatically happen? Well, I guess it just automatically happened. Alright. Well, that was a bit anticlimactic. But let's take a look. See who, that doesn't work. Let's do, the new interpreter session is here, session 2. Let's see if info does anything. No. Let's do get system. Got system via technique 1, named pipe impersonation. So it looks like we are escalated to the system user. How to check which user I am in interpreter shell. Just to verify. Get UID. We are NT authority system, and as mentioned up here, you might see that as one of the elevated users. We got elevated, son. Alright, so we have elevated privileges, and I'm going to stop the video here, and for the next one we'll do the lateral movement portion, also called a pivot, where we're basically moving deeper into a network. Now that we've got our initial access, pretend you're on a property and you've gained access to one building, now you're trying to find a connection point that's open to the next building over that's otherwise locked on the outside. So that lateral movement comprises user password, brute force attack, or compromising an SSH key. So we'll probably go in via SSH. We've got the hash previously. We'll see if we need to get another one, and we'll go from there. And for this, we established a interpreter session. We explored some exploits. We used migrate on the notepad process ID to stabilize or stealthify or privilege escalify ourselves in our interpreter shell. We sent a local ask over to Windows once we were connected to escalate our privileges, and that seemed to just automatically go through. There was no prompt that had to hit yes. So, but we did verify that we do have escalated privileges after running get system using get UID to see this fella. So, as they say, fam, we are in. See you next time. Do good things. Learn real good. Be a good guy. Or gal.